Yeah, it's a bit of a long story. It's complex, and there were all kinds of pain, some very mysterious, some not. Um, in my case, I think, chronic pain is not that rare, but in my case, some of the causes were of the strangeness of this, let's call it spiritual work. And my teacher um, forecasted that, I think it's the right word, like forecasted that um, I was of the type that would likely have to deal with that. Um, he kind of said, I'm really sorry to say this, but I'm getting this intuition that you're going to have to go through a lot of physical pain. Um, and I had very shortly after, I had a really strong energetic awakening. You could call it Kundalini. And it was just, most of it was physical pain. Um, and then there was all of the kind of mystical journeys of, bliss and kind of the ups and the downs. But the physical pain was kind of the core of it. Um, so that was kind of the beginning of really dealing with physical pain. Um, and it was the thing that caused most, I don't know if most, but a big part of the mental, psychological suffering. I already was suffering immensely before that. But it became kind of the focus. So anything I could do to alleviate the physical pain. Um, that's kind of the beginning of really kind of working with that. And I'm talking about 15 to 20 years ago. Um, then there were all other kinds of pain, and some I was able to address more medically. Um, so I'm not sure how to kind of answer that, but what happened is a lot of it went away, but in a sense it also went away as I was able to be with it and not fight it. Um, and then at some point something shifted where it no longer mattered. So the pain, in a sense, without the psychological attachment of it being pain, the psychological, let's say the mental seeing of it only as pain and only as something unwanted, unpleasant, when it was seen as a certain kind of aliveness and sensation, as one more kind of color in the palette of experience. I was, in a sense, freed from the pain. But then there still is physical pain. Um, but it could happen that if, I cut myself, or, I hit my toe on the table, it's still something that can be unpleasant, but the reactivity that used to go with that, uh, it kind of disappeared. But also the physical, the chronic pain, in a sense, most of it is gone. And I think mostly due to the kind of ending of the resistance of it. And it's almost like the cause of a lot of that pain was resistance. And I think maybe you can more objectively say something if you have anything you...
Yeah, from my perspective, like you had like quite a strong sensitivity to sensation in general. And like I remember one of the first weekends we spent together, I remember we both at the end of it said like that I was like really focused on psychological problems and you were really focused on the physical. And like Nick was the kind of person like if he stubbed his toe, he'd be like screaming, not like screaming in pain necessarily, but screaming in protest, like mad and and like we would go, because I'm Canadian, we would go swim in the ocean up here and it's freezing. Nico's not used to that. And he'd be literally screaming like about how cold it was. Like, I'm going to die.
I would actually cramp up. So a lot of my body would get like cramps from like my whole back, my legs, my arms.
Yeah, which is a real condition. It's got a name.
It has a name, and it was very painful.
But then after the shift, one day we were in the kitchen. Nico's in the kitchen, and we have these really sharp kitchen knives, and he accidentally, not on purpose at all, but accidentally drew it across his fingertips, and also Nico's a pianist, right? So his fingertips matter a lot, and he was just like looking at it, like, oh wow, and I was like, this is extremely different, like for you.
Yeah, I used to hate cold water. Was just torture, absolute torture. And so I would kind of, because living here, we would go to the beach, and one day of the summer when it's like 32 degrees, it's just like the one day of the year, I would kind of put myself through the kind of process of getting into the ocean, and I would end up cramping up and like in agony.
Strangers would be like, "You're gonna be okay, man."
And then I read a sign that said people can cramp up and drown. So it's like, this is kind of what it feels like could happen to me. But then one day we did this, and completely surprising to me, I went into the ocean, and Catherine went in with her daughter, and they would always go and be in there for a while, 5 minutes and come out. And I would go in, be like 40 seconds, and then come out like all cramped up. And I just stayed there for 20, 25 minutes. And what happened is there was this immense cold, this deep cold. And then I just started to feel this fire and heat. And where there used to be cramping and pain, it was just heat. And I just felt kind of boiling up. And I stayed in the water until I kind of got tired. And I came out, I'm completely kind of shocked.
But there's been other really mysterious things too. Like, you remember when we were in Mexico, Nico one day was like feeling sick. Like, you vomited.
I don't remember.
Yeah. And then went to work.
Oh, that, yes.
And then came home and then was like, oh, I don't feel well. And I'm not used to the tropics. So I was like, oh no, he's got some tropical disease maybe. Oh, what's going on? And then you started sort of, it was a process of like maybe 40 minutes or something. You started kind of joking and laughing. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. But there was like, he didn't seem to have a temperature, but if I had put my hand on his belly, it was boiling hot. The head was cool. It was really weird. And then I'm like, well, what do you feel like you need or want, right? And I'm kind of panicked, right? And he's like, I think I need to dance. I'm like, okay.
I actually started shaking. I was in bed and I was all kind of crawled up into kind of like, I forget the sensations, but it was like some kind of pain. and I started shaking my arms and my body and my legs, and I started to feel like
Oh
this
yeah, and I'm like,
big
is this a
release.
symptom of dengue? Like, does it make you shake? Or...
And she was looking at me worried. I'm like, no, this is feeling good. And then 5 minutes later, I was dancing, and I started to get just so high, just this kind of deep,
Yeah, and
deep,
then you
deep.
kicked me out of the house. You're like, go, not really, but he's like, just I want to be alone. I'm like, okay.
We had a dinner planned actually,
That's right. We went
and
without you.
I skipped the dinner, and I said I'm gonna stay and dance. I was just blissed out for like hours, and they went up for dinner.
But like the point I want to make is like some of it was very physical. Like he did vomit. He did have this heat like in the belly, and then it switched. It's just very mysterious.
Yeah.
But you also have the type of mind body that you tend to like cramp, or you're used to it. Right?
Yeah.
Like yeah. And you had a lot of facial
A lot of
tics.
still there's a lot of kind of releasing in my jaw, but it's I used to be, it could happen that I would lift my leg to go over like two kind of a staircase, and I would get like stabbing pain in my back, and I would have to get taken to the hospital and get injections too.
Yeah.
It was just really bad.
So yeah, and you also used to have this facial thing you did, where you do it once in a while still, but he'd go be like Julian probably knows.
Julian's
He's
laughing.
Like, and I remember your business partner, who's a friend of mine, would be like, "What is he doing?" I'm like, "I don't know." But it's some sort of unwinding, or I don't know. So you have kind of a non-normal body thing happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But chronic pain was a core part of that. Not sure if that answers your question, Joe.
Don't worry about it. You're probably not like him. No, but the pain thing is there's a lot of mental interpretation of pain, right? That's what's happening.
Yeah, the big thing was this deep belief that if only the pain would stop, I would be okay. And now it literally is just sensation. It's the sensation we call pain, different kinds, but I only experience it as just another kind of sensation. There's no, obviously when it's intense, it's like, that's like, wow, that's a lot. But otherwise, it's really, there can be a kind of like expression like that, like a damn, that's painful. But there isn't any of what there used to be, which is this very deep sense of not okayness. Yeah, I obviously can't speak to the process as you would experience, as women experience it. But if I speak to it as, a form of pain, which I imagine is physical and has obviously the hormonal shifts that will change moods, thoughts. Um, so if I were to imagine that, I'm pretty sure there will be an aggravation related to psychological resistance. And that aggravation might not only turn what is there as real sensation into something worse, but maybe even amplify it in the sense of intensify the real sensation. And so I can imagine it to be possible that a layer of that can be cleared. Obviously not all of it, but to a degree where, it could be a process where there's a period that is uncomfortable with all the kinds of sensations that are difficult or unpleasant, but without the layer that it is actually the only thing that makes it truly unpleasant. It's the psychological resistance. It's hard to describe because I have to, for my own personal experience, I have to be clear there is pain. There can be pain. It's the same sensation fired by the nerves, and the experience of it is the same. But then there's changes in how that's interpreted that before it didn't look like an interpretation. It seemed like I was relating to the thing itself and I was relating to the interpretation. And the problem seemed to be the sensation itself, but it was the interpretation. And so without that, the sensation itself, I could say I have no problem with it. And obviously, if I were to have a disease where there's now, if I get cancer and I'm in agonizing pain every day and night, I'm going to have a problem with it. And I don't know how that I will relate to that. But in hindsight, looking at all the pain I've gone through, I see clearly how so much of it, the let's say 95% of what was the problem with the experience was psychological. And by psychological, I mean there's a mental overlay, there's a thought process. And so something that, for example, feels like there's a sensation of pain and it feels intense and unpleasant, but when the layer of the interpretation clears, and this happened to me very many times where it was an instant clearing and I would see kind of the veil of the interpretation clear, then the intensity that was there originally became seen or experienced as there's a certain kind of pleasure in it, but not like a masochistic pleasure in the pain. There was a certain kind of aliveness and a kind of an energy to it. And at times even something that I could feel as loving. But when the overlay of resistance was there was fear. And the fear of it, the fear is this narrative of this is bad, something's bad and it's going to get worse, and when is this going to end? And this kind of very visceral fear, a resistance to it, which is the fear of it. Then the experience of that intensity, which without the fear was a loving aliveness, with the fear on it, it was agonizing pain. And all I knew it as was agonizing pain. And something that was bad, it shouldn't be there, and if everything would be better if it was gone. But without that mental overlay, without that fear, it was just this intense aliveness, which I could say, and this is hard to put words clearly, but there was a lovingness to it. And that was really shocking to me when I started to have these kind of glimpses of that overlay clearing and the fear vanishing, and then the actual sensation being like the pure, raw, direct sensation was nothing like what it seemed to be without that veil, without that interpretation. And that's why in the meditations, when I'm saying something like, what we're looking for is here, it's that extreme where no matter what is happening, if it shouldn't be this way, it should be different. So what I'm looking for is somewhere else, or tomorrow or later, when this stops. That's actually the in a sense the problem, but that's actually the misunderstanding. And to be able to see so clearly that even in the deepest pain, what I'm looking for is here. And this happened to me in you're leaving?
I have to go.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Kiss. It happened to me also with emotional pain, where in the moments where I would recur to the places of deepest emotional pain, there was a moment where this kind of glimpsing was happening, and so things were being seen through. But this moment where here I am again in this deep, agonizing pain because of the circumstance of life right now, and then just naturally my attention went directly into the pain. And the same thing happened in a sense. The seeing through the veil of, this is bad, this shouldn't be this way, this has to stop. And when that cleared and there was just the pain, in a sense it vanished. And there was only this kind of heartful aliveness, and I could say love. And then the more this happened, the more the key triggers of the belief, the underlying belief that well-being, peace, happiness depend on a certain circumstance that I need to control and get more of, less pain, more pleasure, that whole thing started to become undermined. There's no longer, I couldn't keep that belief system in place, because going through the deepest pains, the deepest fears, the deepest circumstances and situations and experiences that I needed to control and avoid, when I was there, and then they were seen and experienced as loving and okay, then that whole mechanism of I'm looking for something somewhere else just stopped. But it actually, in a sense, it did require, at least in my case, it required for me to go through those experiences and see through the illusion that was converting them into something so miserable and that I needed to avoid. Yeah. I mean, you're right in that there is no separation between mind and body. And it's a lot more complex and mysterious than we can imagine. And there's still a lot of scientific learning and progress on that. And so some parts of the process that are healthy work well, and it might require, the body's constantly killing uh, organisms that are unwanted, and that's keeping a state of health. Um, and then sometimes that becomes, there's a disease where, for example, you describe cancer. But then cancer, one of my teachers, he was a medical doctor, and then he had an awakening and started doing retreats. But a lot of the people that came to him were his patients, his who came from deep illness. And for many years, he did working with people who were very diseased, and he's had a lot of remissions. And to his surprise, from cancer, just by, let's call it, meditation. And so, just to summarize what he was doing, he was doing a lot of kinds of different, energetic practices, and to this day, he's still very surprised and does not know exactly why that has happened. He's written about it, and he's written many books, and he's also written like a medical article about the remission, the spontaneous remission of cancer. And he even identified the type of person that were more likely to be prone to cancer. And it was a type of mental structure. And so he, for example, saw that there were different types of psychological types, and one was more likely to get cancer and the other one was more likely to become schizophrenic. And so he put the schizophrenics who worked with him and the cancer patients worked with him together, and they would kind of balance each other out. The schizophrenic were able to get off medicine, and the cancer patients were becoming better, less symptomatic, and some went into remission. He didn't really understand how it happened, but he knew that this was. And so I'm telling you this because it shows that there's a lot going on that's very mysterious, and the connection between mind and body is a lot more powerful than we think.